The earliest mention of Syria in classical literature occurs to the works of Aeschylus and Herodotus, at the time when the Greeks became acquainted with Assyria. It was a province of the vast Roman Empire. The name of Syria was formed as a result of the Greek mispronunciation of Assyria. In times past, Syria included the countries known as Aram in the Old Testament. Those were Assyria, Mesopotamia, Babylonia, and Palestine, the entire area spread over Egypt into Arabia, the Tigris, and Cilicia. The land of Syria encompasses an immense collection of cultural and historical monuments. Over time, it has been repeatedly ruled by Phoenicia, Assyria, the Hittite Empire, Rome, Persia, Egypt, Babylon, the Damascus Kingdom, Byzantium, and the Arab Caliphate. Each of them has left definite architectural tracks of their power.
The ancient Greek historian Herodotus wrote that the Greeks called the Assyrians by the name Syrian, dropping the A. And that's the first instance we know of the distinction in the name of the same people. Then the Romans, when they conquered the western part of the former Assyrian Empire, they gave the name Syria to the province they created, which is today Damascus and Aleppo. So that is the distinction between Syria and Assyria. They are the same people, of course, and the ancient Assyrian Empire was the first real empire in history. What do I mean? It is that it had many different peoples included in the empire, all speaking Aramaic and becoming what may be called Assyrian citizens. That was the first time in history that we have this. For example, Elamite musicians were brought to Nineveh and they were made Assyrians, which means that Assyria was more than just a small country. It was the empire, the whole Fertile Crescent.
The people of Syria, together with the Mesopotamians, made up a Semitic tribe called Arameans. Little is known about the prehistoric power structure of Syria. In ancient times, each city with its nearby villages and farmlands represented an independent state. Fabulous Damascus was one of them. For many hundreds of years, Damascus has been a constant war stage for foreign invaders. Like no other modern city in the world, Damascus has been influenced by a spectacular patchwork of diverse cultures and peoples. During its existence, the city has been a witness to the passage of every historical era, starting from the Neolithic. Eight gates gave entrance to Damascus. Today, the quarter between the gates of Bab Tuma and Bab Sharq is inhabited by Christians. People belonging to various Christian communities, such as Armenians and Orthodox Syrians, live here. Narrow streets twist through the depth of the suburb, where proud churches of Catholic, Syriac Orthodox, and Armenian apostolic faiths rise grandiosely into the sky from among residential buildings. Along with neighboring mosques, churches of different beliefs are peacefully placed on the dazzling background of the eastern city. Those shrines are revered by every Christian. A few years ago, a miracle happened in the courtyard of St. Joseph Chaldean Church in Aleppo. The statue of Virgin Mary started crying bloody tears. Countless pilgrims now come to pray and venerate the Mother of God at this site. Each Christian community, snuggled around its belief, lives a distinctive life and shares a principal goal: upholding Christianity and national traditions.
The Assyrians, like Armenians and Jews, in urban areas in particular, lived around their places of worship. We have to remember that people did not have modes of transportation other than walking, especially for people considered by Islam to be dhimmis. There were at times restrictions on whether they could even ride a horse. Sometimes if they had to ride, they were forced to ride donkeys, for example. So that people needed to live within walking distance of their places of worship. So that among the Assyrians then, you had the Monophysite, that is the Syriac Church, the Syriac Catholic Church, the Chaldean Catholic Church, and of course the Church of the East, which had their community, their members, living within walking distance of the churches, so that they became somewhat confined to their own communities and did not necessarily have much to do with the other communities, partly because of religious denominational reasons and partly because of distance. Although the language was something that they shared, depending on which part of the Middle East they came from, and the writing system, of course, was the same. Still, there were dialects that affected communications as well.
Medieval Syria, the richest province of the Roman Empire, occupied the approximate area extended from the southeast end of Asia Minor to the upper banks of the Jordan, and from the northeast shores of the Mediterranean Sea to the valley of the Tigris and Euphrates. In the works of medieval Armenian historians, particularly of Moses Khorenatsi, the Roman province of Syria was called Asorik, the Syriac people, Asoriner, and the classical Syriac language, Asoriren.
There is a long period in the history of the world theater which is not researched so far. It dates back to the 5th through the 12th centuries, beginning from the collapse of the Roman Empire up to the formation of the European national kingdoms. The European literature researchers call this time period Greek, Syriac, Coptic, followed by the Western period Latin, Celtic, German. I would call the Greek, Syriac, Coptic period Assyrian Armenian as well, because the Armenians too belong to that period. Syria, or Asoric as the Armenians call it, was the leader in this aspect, for since the fall of the Roman Empire, it had become the main shelter of the Roman theatrical traditions. The facts are based in the existence of the ruins of theaters, which were many in the Middle East. In Syria, there were theaters in Edessa, Jabail, Bosra, Gaza, and Sirius. I counted only 5, but there were probably more. Several facts point out that the mimic theater in particular developed and prospered in Syria or Asoric. The most interesting fact referring to this is the speech of a 5th century scholar, Horicius, in support of the mimic theater. The theory on rejecting of the theater art developed even long before the early pre-Christian ages. Different speeches against theater were being written. That means the social communication system, which was functioning before the Christian era, was outdated, while Christianity brought about a new setting of social communication, the Church rejecting the old system.
Malula. It's an Arabic word meaning entrance. It's a tiny island of Christianity. With an amazingly conserved ancient Aramaic as its spoken language. Aramaic is one of the oldest languages in the world, having passed down to our days. Formed in the 9th century BC, it was primarily the language of the Semitic tribes wandering across the Middle East region. Despite the fact that the Arameans were not united and didn't enjoy statehood, the language eventually became the lingua franca, meaning the language for international contact. In the Near East and the language of diplomacy up to the times of the triumphal invasions of Alexander the Great.
On the Christian side, we see another old literary form of Aramaic, so-called classical Syriac, based on the Aramaic dialect of Edessa, still being the liturgical language of some of the Middle Eastern churches, like the Syriac Orthodox Jacobite Church, or the Assyrian Nestorian Church of the East, or the Chaldean Church in Iraq, or the Maronite Church in Lebanon. But Syriac is not just a liturgical language, it is also the language of a very rich cultural and spiritual heritage of the parishioners of those churches, who are mainly Arameans by origin, although they are very often believed to be Christian Arabs, as they speak Arabic in their daily lives. And here we come to the strongest point when we call in question the dead status of Aramaic, and that is that some of those Aramean communities not only use Aramaic as a liturgical language, but also as a language of, as a spoken language. There are at least 3 so-called Neo-Aramaic or Modern Aramaic languages that still survive in isolated pockets throughout the Middle East and Caucasus.
Aramaic was spoken in Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, and Jordan. Today, the Aramaic spoken in Malula harks back to that ancient past. But other forms of Aramaic survive in larger pockets, mainly spoken by the Assyrians of the Middle East. The language of Jesus survives, but as the smallest Semitic language to this day. The present Arab Republic of Syria is a unique Middle Eastern country. It has traditionally provided a hospitable environment for all national minorities, often enjoying a fraternal relationship to them. Syria represents a blend of historical monuments of various civilizations and a place where Eastern and Western cultures have met. Visitors to Syria can go back some 3,000 years to the times of Roman Empire or feel the breath of the Arab Caliphate. In 1939, the League of Nations was granted permission on acquisition of territories of some 20 to 30 miles in the Al-Hasaka province of the French-mandated Syria. Subsequently, the Assyrian refugees from Iraq settled in Al-Hasaka. In the 20th century, many misfortunes and agonies befell the Assyrian nation. Beginning in the 20th century, Assyrians, together with other Christian minorities living in the Ottoman Turkey, were fated to endure the horrible episodes of the 1915 genocide. Having survived the Turkish Yatahan, the remaining segment of the decimated Assyrian nation continued experiencing severe hardships and miseries. Deprived of their homeland, mountain Assyrian survivors, headed by their spiritual leader, Patriarch Marshimun Benyamin, were forced to forever abandon their life in the impassable mountains of Hakkari. Wandering and humiliated, the Assyrian remnants scattered throughout the world. Many of them made their way through Hamadan, Iran, to Bakuba, Baghdad, and Mosul. There, they stayed under the British care, who intended to use the Assyrians for political purposes. Reared in the rugged mountain environment, the Assyrian tribesmen were more than able to defend themselves and made excellent soldiers. As such, many of them were recruited by the British authorities to form the famed special forces known as the Assyrian Levies. The Levies continues serving under the British till the late 1940s.
أما أتوراي قملة جوخوشمة العراق بطلابة حقوثة ديالنا أرآثة ومطواثة إيمن دي يطلب لها حقوثة من إنجلسنا من أرباي العراق لا يولى أنا أتوراي كتولة أسكد ليوي دي أسكدين دي إنجلسناي مرا لازم مربوطن كسياسة وخو بطلوتو مسكرية لين مرذول لاني شرطيني بلوتو مسكرية إنجلسناي مبارب فلتلاي طلب له من باتريركا مرئي شاينورا صندوقي تشد له قريشة آميدية رئيس مختاري وملكي وجورانة آتوراي ميرا أخني ليش ألغيو أفرة عراق لازم طلبغ شرطا وفي الخانة تاوخني الخيمة تاولن بيتها يو عراق أنا إيمن جميلة جورشت آميدية كثولة أسرى شرطي ميرا من دي قمايا آصيميديا هو يا دهك باثر عاصمة مثيلا مدرسة مقرأ تريلي شاني عربي وإنجليز ومبر هذا ما مري أمراني تاويلا أمراني وأويلا أرآثة ومفاطة كتويلة بشمه.
The unsettled question of Assyrian autonomy in Iraq, political games, and the tension between Assyrian and Iraqi nationalists eventually boiled over into open fighting. The outcome of this fighting was the horrific massacres of northern Iraqi Assyrians by the Iraqi National Army units in August of 1933.
After the period of British patronage ended, 70,000 Assyrians made a request of receiving land loans in the places of their residence. But Baghdad reacted with hostility to the natural and modest request of the so-called ungrateful Assyrians and intensified its oppressions. And the English authorities, who did not need the Assyrian services anymore, abandoned them, leaving this nation to the mercy of fate. Moreover, turning their back on their former allies, the British left them to the regressive Iraq that did not fall to get even with the Assyrians organizing their massacres. On July 18, 1933, The Assyrian spiritual leader Marshimun became an undesirable person in Iraq and had to leave for Cyprus. Here he raised his complaint against the British disregard. In response to that, the British again began to drive a wedge among the Assyrians, Kurds, and Arabs, trying to resolve the Assyrian question, totally exterminating the latter. In late August 1933, when thousands of Assyrians were trying to move their families to Syria, zone of the French patronage, Iraqi authorities used armed force against them on the bank of the river Tigris.
The Iraqi authorities aimed to disarm the Assyrians, but they refused to obey the directive to lay down their arms based on credible fears of harm. The Iraqi government had devised and intended to implement a plan for the disarmament and deportation of Assyrians from the region. As a part of the operational phase of this plan, the Assyrians living in the village of Samel and its surrounding areas were brutally butchered by the Iraqi army. In a continued wave of destruction, the Assyrian settlements in northern Iraqi regions of Ahmadiyya, Sakho, Dohu, Sheikh Khan, and others were swept away by the violence. Meanwhile, the Iraqi mass media engaged in a propaganda campaign blaming the Assyrians for perpetuating a war against the Iraqi people. August 7 is another bloody page in Assyrian history known as Qatlat, Sameli, or Sameli massacres. Every year on this day of mourning, the Assyrians commemorated the sacrifice made by the Assyrian martyrs and pay tribute to the victims of the genocide. Assyrian villages on the Khabur are comfortably situated along the river by the same name. Refugees from northern Iraq have settled here according to the region of Hakkari, to which they originally belonged. Hakkari province is situated in current-day Turkey.
بداية ما زي ماشينا بداية ما خمشي تربات أخوة خمشي ترباتي يعني ترم طمة وتفاني السر نفوسي مطيق بداية ما شو رايا نلاقي إن كم بكتخة يعني كتخة كم سو طاسي سو خمش مستو تمر يعني ورب سير على مدى تم تسقى بتريل في نفوسي تظهر متسقى قرب ألف نفوسي سين خابر وين نخو خابر تما يمتوا لك خابر قم هو فرنساي قم يا ولد أبران وقم يا ولد يعني مدري أخني أخوتي وأول قصفة يمن الخرسلين من رسلين مدري تركيا لقبلها تركيا ميرة خو مغير كوي رقم من هود تركيا 60 كيلومتر شون من دي لثوة إي منطين لخ برية أخني وزارة الناشا عرباي تم يقدينها بروزيسة ولا طالوخت أنا بقاني ذهم زمن دم بروزيسة دمو قام مرسلين وتخلص بروزيسة أخني ودم بروزيسة أختنس شو من لسه قلة اسمها سيوالوخ ما يوالوخ نحن تمنت أنا رابقة تمنت عرباي أخني ودنا بروجيس خاطر شو مصفصفة خلاف لسه مرجن نار زيلان إلاني زيلان تنياثة زيلان خوخي مشي إنوي هذا خمرة مترسخوها خمرة مترسخوها خمرة برميل مترسخوها خمرة من الطالعة
Members of the original 5 semi-independent Hakkari mountain tribes, Upper Tiari, Tkhuma, Jilu, Bas, and Dis, still make up the majority of the Khabur Assyrians. Tribal identification seems to remain strong among these Assyrians. Practically everyone is able to identify the particular tribal affiliation of the neighboring villages. Until the 1940s, Assyrian refugees were not granted Syrian citizenship. However, in time, a dam was constructed over the desert lands and water pumps were set up. The first irrigation dam was placed on the east bank of the river. Assyrian migrants cultivated the desert lands, grew vineyards, fruit trees, cotton, and wheat. However, not every settlement succeeded in farming. The general lack of water and scarcity of annual rainfall forced the people to move to larger Syrian settlements and even to Lebanon in search of jobs and a better life. The Assyrians today make up about 20% of Tel Tamar's urban village population. The Assyrians of this bustling little town, the largest of the Habur settlements, are mostly clustered around the high ground near the banks of the Habur River. In the 1960s, Tel Tamar was an entirely Assyrian inhabited community. Now it has only 350 Assyrians. Most current Tel Tamar inhabitants are either Kurds or recently settled Arab Bedouins. Since the Assyrian resettlement in the Habur, the first state school was established in Tel Tamar. Later, this was followed by the construction of the hospital. In Tel Tamar, the Church of Our Lady, completed in the early 1980s, still serves as the center of the Assyrian community. Some 500 meters away from the new church stands a large green domed brick mosque, built in the 1970s to serve the growing Muslim population. It's been 2 years since the Assyrian Association started its mission in Tel Tamar. Prior to this, any activity by a national organization in Syria was strictly prohibited. The center of the Assyrian Association is still in Tel Tamar, although many branches are in operation in different Habur villages. The organization aims at supporting poor families, and in particular, young people and students. Construction of sports clubs and purchase of an area for the new headquarters are the plans of the association for the nearest future. The association includes members not only from the Church of the East, but also from the Chaldean and the Syriac Orthodox churches. It's a New Year party in one of Tel Tamar's clubs where the local youth has gathered. It's encouraging to see these beautiful and promising young people as the pledge of the future of the nation. Assyrian music and songs are being performed by a local band. Everyone here knows how to dance the Assyrian national dances in a lively manner. Every first Wednesday in January, the Tel Machas villagers begin preparing murtucha at 6 a.m. Murtucha is a blend of oil, flour, and salt, baked on the hearth. It is given to every resident of the village, but the first share, according to the tradition, goes to Habur's barren women. Three pieces of murtucha have been already put aside. According to tradition, when tasting murtucha with faith, the barren woman will be able to bear children. As we were told by the villagers, this tradition was primarily popular among the Jilu Assyrians, but it has already been many years that the people of Tel Mahas, originally of Hakkari's Gawar district, follow it. At one time, Sharad Sliva, or Feast of the Holy Cross, was largely celebrated by the villagers of Marzaya from Hakkari's Jilu region. Such festivals were accompanied by traditional music and dances and gathered many people from the nearby Ashirats. Marzaya, one of the most revered saints of the Assyrian Church of the East, passed away on the first Wednesday of January in 1431 AD. Murtucha is prepared every year on this day.
ملكد ملكي أورغ لشنا ودهولي عشنا لا ونزا يا مارد خاطب نسخاني نهوي عيد بريخ عليكن وكريستياني وثهو نرخيمي عيني ملكي عبدياني.
The service on the occasion of Murtucha is celebrated at the church in Tel Mahas. Marzaya's hagiography reveals that the saint lived and preached in the Jilu region together with his disciple. A homonymous church stands in Jilu where Marzaya's relics repose. The large village of Tel Hormuz on the isolated west bank of the Habur is the stronghold of the ancient Church of the East, which is based on the old calendar. Seated in Baghdad, Maradide is the patriarch of this church. It's January 7 today. Sticking to the old calendar, villagers of Tel Hormuz celebrate Christmas on this day. It's a Christmas liturgy. The church of Rabban Pithian is crowded with believers from Tel Hormuz and adjacent villages. The settlement is made up of some 150 Assyrian families today. All of them are descendants of Assyrians from the Tahuma Ashirat. The people here are fortunate to have land plots with a sufficient supply of water. Vineyards, orchards, and agricultural crops planted by Assyrians still remain in this area. Tel Hormuz winemakers are famed in the region. Over the past years, the Habur River grew shallow, causing massive damage to the villages being irrigated by it. Many fields, once fertile and flourishing, are waterless now. Only grain can be grown there. This magnificent temple of Mat Mariam in Tel Nazri was built a few years ago. Since not every settlement has a priest, Kasha Givargis David serves in Tel Nazri, as well as the neighboring villages. History records a number of cases when Muslims have revered Christian saints and holy sites. This Arab man, leaving his shoes at the entrance to the shrine, has modestly taken a seat at the end of the hall, venerably following service. At school, classes on the mother tongue and sacred writing are carried out by a clergyman. The village church committee of Tel Nasri is one of the most active and organized in the Habur. Many churches bear the names of the Hakkari traditional shrines. Tel Hafian has Mar Shalita. Mar Shalita was the saint of the patriarchal church in the Hakkari village of Kochanis, where the villagers of Tel Hafian originally came from. This is the Christian quarter of Kamishli with narrow, meandering streets, high buildings and imposing shrines. The largest communities are the Syriac Orthodox and Armenian Gregorian. The city has also communities of Chaldean Uniates, Catholic Syrian, Assyrian Church of the East, Catholic Armenian and Protestant churches. The Assyrian Church of the East community totals an estimated 150 families, of which 20 follow the old calendar of Maradai Church. They live in this part of the city. During the summer holidays, the churches carry out classes on Assyrian and sacred writing. The Assyrian Church of the East, named in honor of Mara Prem, offers sport classes and music training for the young people in Kamishli. The folklore school with Urhai, dancing lessons, is in operation in Kamishli. The school has different age groups. These are the Urhai students demonstrating Assyrian folkloric dances. They took the first place award in the dance competition at the festival held in Damascus in 2005. Assyrian Democratic Organization Mtakasta, one of the Assyrian political parties, launched its mission in Kamishli in 1957. The conception of political movements with such patriotic flair was based on the emergence of a national ideology inspired by prominent Assyrian leaders such as Naum Faik, Freydun Aturaya, and Ashur Joseph. Mtakasta, founders made up of representatives from the Syriac Orthodox and the Church of the East communities, had an ideology based on creating a unified Assyrian nation irrespective of denominational affiliation. The organization aims at serving the nation dutifully. The Mtakasta members and supporters around the world launch business programs and make investments to boost the small and mid-sized businesses in Kamishli. Those investments are intended to benefit the Assyrian people. They purchase commercial properties and residential buildings. The city has 4 hospitals today, all established with Assyrian funds. Most members of both the Assyrian Church of the East and the Uniate Catholic Chaldean Church in Syria are still centered in north and northeast regions of the country. Tel Arbosh is the sole village of the Uniate Catholic Chaldeans. It contains St. George's Chaldean Catholic Convent, which currently has 3 nuns in residence. kindergarten run by the congregation is attended by children from the Habur settlements. They stay here till noon, playing, drawing, and learning to recite and pray. After their day is done, they are taken home. The Assyrian Democratic Party, founded in 1977 in Habur, was born out of an emergence of nationalistic ideas. It was born out of the need to address the past tragic episodes experienced by northern Iraqi Assyrians and to pay tribute to the victims of the 1933 Simele massacre. The party's ideology is partially based on the principles of such outstanding Assyrian figures as Mar Shimun Benjamin, Freydun Aturaya, and Ashur Joseph. One of the goals of the ADP is creating political stability in the region, which will strengthen the nation and promote the rights of the Assyrians. The party provides medicines to the Assyrians living in northern Iraq and supports the Assyrian students. The ones who study in Aleppo are the members of the ADP-founded Youth Council of Mar Narsai. The Orient, the birthplace of human culture. The first clause of the Hakkari parable is reminiscent of the struggle for the survival of human ideas, a place of birth, but no burial. The glorious mountains of Hakkari are left behind in modern-day Turkey. That area of the world is now the hottest spot in recent history. The bitter memories of the new generations of Highlander Assyrians are intertwined with Hakkari, where their ancestors once lived. Every nation has its stories and legends, riddles and fables. Sometimes they have analogous meanings, but differ in form. They are popular among common people and are passed on from generation to generation. Ordinary people are similar irrespective of race and religion. Thus, wisdom is universal with no homeland and nationality. Riddles, parables, and legends were largely popular in the Hakkari Mountains. The folklore was essentially based on biblical themes. Many of these traditions still exist in the tiny Habur settlements. The Habur people of Hakkari origins still bear many parables, anecdotes, and fables in the corners of their memory. A Syrian woman is highly moral, hardworking, and devoted to her husband, wrote researchers. The most sacred work for Assyrian women is baking of lavash, thinly rolled out dough baked on tanura walls. Tanura is a clay-coated pit where fire is kindled. With this archaic instrument called jarusta, the Assyrian women mill wheat and other cereals to prepare various dishes of grinded grains. This instrument called khashulta is for grinding oats. It's a hard task to be done by women. That is why exclamations like these need to be let out to muster up strength during the process. Habur people are very hospitable. A visitor cannot walk past a house. The master will get offended. Here, people respect anyone who crosses the threshold of their house. Vardiya's household is small, but extremely clean, where everything's in its place. The table is laid with traditional Assyrian meals, chipte and kabebad. Today, harissa is the centerpiece of the table. It's an oriental dish prepared of cracked wheat and well-cooked chicken. Harissa is mostly made on religious holidays or feasts of saints. Dekhva is one of the traditional dishes of the Hakkari Assyrians. It's made of mutton, dry buttermilk, and grinded oats, and is served up mainly on holidays. In the traditional lifestyle of Habur, a family may have at least 5 children or more. However, the new generations view life from more modern perspectives. Extended family of Dadishu has gathered together today. In its head, the grandfather is surrounded by his sons, daughters-in-law, and grandchildren to celebrate New Year 2006. Sava Daniel, getting a little tipsy on his favorite drink, arak, started telling jokes and anecdotes about the Hakkari Highlanders and the Urmia Assyrians. The emotional outburst of the Highlanders, sons, is on full display, especially on New Year's Eve. They are as soldierly, as energetic, and as loud as their ancestors. From the earliest times, Assyrians have had a rich collection of folk songs. Many of them have passed on to our days. Despite her declining years, grandmother Yonia from Tel Nasri village has an impressive and sonorous voice.
لقاء
With a profound tremble, she performed a patriotic song called Nishra di Tchuma, the Eagle of Tchuma. Like many old people here, she remembers almost every national song and hands them over to the next generation. Step by step, the idea begins to take on form. A dance is a reflection and reproduction of the history, culture, and philosophy of the people. The dances reflect a part of the people, their attitudes toward life and their traditions. Khoshaba, a person famed because of his traditional national costumes, symbolizes an Assyrian Highlander living in impregnable places. Those who remember him confess that little has changed in his appearance over the years. Though he is not young, his performance of the Assyrian dances is spirited and full of life. In this way, he passes on to the next generation the philosophy of the dance, which embodies the ancestral traditions. Sepa and Matala, or the sword and the shield, is a winner's dance. It was performed during the triumph over the defeated enemy. Men armed with swords and shields made a victorious round dance together with women. Group dancing, performed by the entire village. That's how these dances were characterized. Today, it's the same way. As long as the Assyrian song and dance lives on, even in a tiny settlement in Khabur, where Khigit Jamat is accompanied with the inspiring sounds of Zurna and Dabula, the nation will live on.